This time, it's into the life and mysterious disappearance of, well, Amelia Earhart, of course.
Ah, Amelia Earhart.
We've got some excerpts here from the biography, Amelia Earhart, A Life of Flight and Mystery.
Mhm.
And we're going to use those to, like, chart her journey, explore those theories about her last flight, and just figure out why her story still, captivates so many people, even today.
It's interesting when you really dig into Amelia Earhart's story, you realize it's like more than just about, flying. It kind of reflects what was going on in society at the time, especially for women.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Like we're talking about the 1920s and 30s, women were like pushing for change, They wanted more freedom, more opportunities, and there she was up in the air, literally breaking boundaries. It's almost like she was a symbol for all that.
Totally. It's like she embodied that whole idea of breaking free, like in every sense of the word. And even when you look at her childhood, it's like right there. I mean, climbing trees, hunting rats, building those crazy sled ramps. Yeah.
It's like she wasn't afraid to get her hands dirty, to be adventurous. It wasn't exactly typical for a girl back then, was it?
Not at all.
Yeah.
Back then, most girls were, expected to be all proper and ladylike,
Yeah.
focused on like domestic stuff. But Earhart, she was out there exploring, taking risks. And you got to remember, her life wasn't always easy. I mean, her dad struggled with alcoholism. That brought a lot of instability to the family financially and emotionally.
Yeah, that's a lot for anyone to deal with, especially a young girl. But it's interesting, despite all that, despite this obvious, love for adventure and mechanics, she wasn't always into airplanes. Like, she saw one at the Iowa State Fair as a kid, and he was like, nothing. No spark, no fascination. It's kind of hard to imagine, right? Amelia Earhart, not interested in airplanes. It does seem ironic, doesn't it? But then, everything changes. In 1920, she goes to an air show in California and takes a short flight. And that's it. That's the moment that ignites her passion. Suddenly, it all clicks. It's not just about being in the air, it's about pushing boundaries, about the freedom that flying represents.
Like a whole new world opened up to her. And from that point on, there was no holding her back. She took on odd jobs just to afford flying lessons, and she even specifically chose a female instructor, Nita Snook. I mean, that says a lot.
Definitely. It shows her commitment to supporting other women in the field. And then she goes and buys her own plane, a bright yellow biplane nicknamed the Canary. Now that's how you make a statement.
It's more than just a statement. It's a declaration of independence. Here's this young woman in a time when female pilots were, like, practically unheard of, and she's taking to the skies in her own bright yellow plane. It's incredible.
And she wasn't just flying for fun. She was determined to prove herself, to show the world what she was capable of. That 1922 altitude record, becoming the first woman to fly solo above 14,000 feet. That wasn't just a record, it was a message. Amelia Earhart was a force to be reckoned with.
So here we have this incredible woman already setting records, challenging all these conventions, and then in 1928, she becomes the first woman to fly across the Atlantic. But here's the thing. She was a passenger on that flight. Now, for most people, that would be enough, wouldn't it? It's a historic achievement.
Absolutely, but not for Amelia Earhart.
She wanted more.
She wanted to be the one in control. She wanted that solo transatlantic flight. And guess what?
She did it.
In 1932, she did it. It's mind-blowing when you think about the courage that took, especially back then. Flying solo across the Atlantic in the 1930s, that was like going to the moon. The technology was basic, weather forecasting was unreliable, and the risks, huge.
It's crazy when you think about it. Navigation was mostly celestial navigation and dead reckoning. Imagine that. Using the stars and the sun to find your way across the Atlantic. And let's not forget about the limitations of radio communication back then.
Right, they were basically flying blind for big chunks of the journey.
And yet, she not only completed the flight, but she did it with such precision and skill that she earned the Distinguished Flying Cross.
And that was a military decoration rarely given to civilians. That's what set her apart. She wasn't just, a daredevil. She was a skilled aviator who meticulously planned her flights.
A true pioneer. And she became an instant icon, right? Accolades, fame, public adoration, it all came pouring in. But she didn't let it go to her head. She used her newfound platform to advocate for other women in aviation.
Exactly. She co-founded the 99s, this organization for female pilots. She didn't just want to break barriers herself. She wanted to open doors for other women to follow her.
It was about creating a community.
Exactly. And all of this is happening while, in the backdrop, the 1930s were a time of huge change for women in all sorts of fields. They were starting to challenge traditional roles, and Earhart's achievements really resonated with that movement.
It's like she became this symbol of progress, this proof that women were capable of anything men could do.
And it wasn't just in aviation. Think about her style. She often wore pants, which was a pretty bold statement at the time, and her signature leather flying helmet. That became an icon, a symbol of her independent spirit.
She was a true trailblazer. But even with all her accomplishments, she set her sights on something even more ambitious, a flight around the world.
In 1937, she decided to circumnavigate the globe. And for this incredible feat, she chose the Lockheed Electra 10E.
A state-of-the-art aircraft for its time.
It had twin engines, it was considered pretty luxurious for the era, and it had this incredible range. They even added extra fuel tanks just for this journey.
That's serious commitment.
Yeah.
But even with a plane like the Electra, this was a ridiculously daring goal.
I mean, think about it. Flying around the world in the 1930s, it was like trying to reach Mars today. It was uncharted territory, full of danger and uncertainty.
And her first attempt in March of 37 didn't go so well. They had to abandon the mission due to some damage during takeoff in Hawaii.
A lot of people would have given up at that point. But not Amelia Earhart.
Nope.
She was undeterred. After they made some repairs and modifications to the plane, she and her navigator, Fred Noonan, set off again. May 20th, 1937, they took off from Oakland, California.
And they were flying east.
Eastward, that's right. Their route took them across South America, then over to Africa, India, Southeast Asia. It was a grueling schedule. They had to stop frequently for refueling and maintenance.
But they were making incredible progress, covering thousands of miles, in a relatively short time. By early July, they had already flown about 22,000 miles. But then came the final leg, and this is the toughest one, crossing the Pacific from Lae, New Guinea to Howland Island. Now picture this. Howland Island. It's a tiny, isolated atoll in the middle of the Pacific Ocean.
Like finding a needle in a haystack, right? Except the haystack is the entire Pacific Ocean. And remember, this is before GPS.
Right.
They had to rely on radio signals and celestial navigation, which were far less precise.
A lot more room for error.
A lot more.
They were so close to achieving something incredible, something that seemed impossible.
So close.
But it seems like fate had other plans. And that's a story for next time.
A story for next time, indeed.
It's July 2nd, 1937. Earhart and Noonan, they take off from Lae, their sights set on that tiny dot in the vast Pacific,
Yeah.
Howland Island, and then nothing. Silence. A mystery that's haunted people, like for generations,
It's one of those mysteries that never gets old, does it?
What happened to Amelia Earhart? I mean, the theories, they're all over the place, right?
We really are.
But the one that seems, I don't know, the most likely, the one that a lot of experts agree on, is that, well, they just crashed and sank. It makes sense,
Yeah.
They were pushing their fuel limits, flying over the Pacific. One wrong move, and it's over.
Fuel exhaustion, that was a real danger back then, especially on those long-distance flights. I mean, they didn't have the technology we have today, no fancy fuel gauges or anything. It was all estimates based on flight time, fuel consumption rates.
Right, like calculating on the fly, literally.
And even a small miscalculation, some unexpected headwinds, that could be it. Game over.
Yeah, it makes sense. But here's the thing that always gets me. If they did crash in the ocean, wouldn't we have found the wreckage by now? I mean, with all the technology, the sonar, everything, you'd think something would have turned up.
Well, the Pacific Ocean is. It's massive. It's swallowed up countless ships and planes over the years. And the Electra, even though it was sturdy for its time, it wasn't built to land on water. If it hit the ocean, it probably broke apart on impact, scattering debris over a huge area.
Yeah, I guess it makes sense. So maybe no wreckage doesn't totally rule out that theory. But it does make you wonder, what else could have happened?
It does, doesn't it?
And that brings us to the Gardner Island theory, which is, I don't know, a lot more interesting, wouldn't you say?
Definitely more intriguing.
So Gardner Island, or Nikumuro, as it's known now, it's this uninhabited atoll in the Phoenix Islands. And the theory is that Earhart and Noonan, instead of crashing in the open ocean, maybe they managed to land on the island.
A controlled crash landing, maybe? Using the Electra's design to their advantage. It's possible, right? She was a skilled pilot.
Exactly. And there's some evidence that kind of supports this theory. Like back in 1940, some bones were found on the island. But at the time, they thought they belonged to a man.
Right.
But more recently, they reanalyzed those bones using, modern forensic techniques.
What did they find?
Well, some researchers believe that those bones could actually match Earhart's skeletal measurements. It's not conclusive, but it's definitely a piece of the puzzle that fits.
It's like something out of a movie, isn't it?
Total castaway vibes. Two explorers stranded on a remote island, fighting to survive. It makes you think, what would that have been like?
The challenges would have been incredible, that's for sure. Finding food and water, shelter, trying to signal for help. Remember, No cell phones, no GPS back then. It would have been a true test of their will to survive.
And they might have been there for weeks, even months, hoping, waiting for a rescue that never came. It's a pretty haunting thought. But of course, there's always another theory, one that's a little, I don't know, maybe more controversial. Some might even say conspiratorial.
Oh yeah, the Japanese capture theory. The one where Earhart and Noonan are captured by the Japanese military.
Right, and this theory plays into all the tension that was brewing between the U.S. and Japan back then, right? Like, were they mistaken for spies or deliberately intercepted? It's a pretty wild idea.
It is, and there are people who believe it, for sure. But most experts aren't convinced. The evidence is pretty thin, mostly anecdotal accounts, rumors, things like that.
So we have these three main theories: crashed and sank, Gardner Island, and Japanese capture. Each one has its own arguments, its own set of evidence, or lack thereof. But none of them completely answers the question, do they? It's like we're missing a key piece of the puzzle.
And maybe that's what keeps people so fascinated by Amelia Earhart's story. It's a puzzle that we haven't quite solved, a reminder that some secrets stay hidden.
And even if we never definitively know what happened to her, her legacy is powerful. Her story still resonates with people all over the world. Why do you think that is?
Well, Amelia Earhart, she wasn't just a daring pilot. She was a symbol, a symbol of ambition, of chasing your dreams no matter what. No matter if you're a man or a woman, no matter what society tells you.
She defied expectations.
She did. And her story, even with its tragic ending, it inspires people to push boundaries, to challenge themselves, to reach for the stars, literally and figuratively.
And it's important to remember that her achievements weren't just individual, were they? She really championed other women in aviation. She wanted to create opportunities for them.
Absolutely. She didn't just break down barriers. She actively worked to make sure others could follow her. And that work continues today,
It does.
Organizations like the 99s, the one she co-founded, and Women in Aviation International, they're carrying that torch. They're supporting female aviators, making sure her pioneering spirit lives on.
It's amazing that even now, almost a century later, we're still talking about her, still trying to figure out what happened, still finding inspiration in her courage. And, beyond the mystery, beyond the accomplishments, there's something about Amelia Earhart that makes me wonder, what was it that drove her? What pushed her to take those risks? What was she trying to achieve? It's almost like we need to understand the woman behind the legend,
Well, what's fascinating, and I think it often gets overlooked, is that Amelia Earhart was a really gifted writer.
Oh, right. I totally forgot about that.
She wrote articles, essays, even a whole memoir called The Fun of It. And her writing gives us this incredible insight into her personality, her motivations, her whole outlook on life.
It's like a window into her soul.
It really is.
So yeah, let's dive into those personal writings, because I think that's where we'll find the answers to those deeper questions. That's where we'll really get to know Amelia Earhart.
Hey, let's do it. It's amazing, isn't it? We have these writings, these words straight from Amelia Earhart herself. It's like we can hear her thoughts, her motivations.
It really is like a direct line to her. And what's really striking is you see this depth to her that goes way beyond just, the image of the daring pilot.
Totally. Like in her memoir, The Fun of It, she talks about her childhood, all those things, exploring, pushing the limits, stuff that wasn't really considered, proper for girls back then.
Oh, I remember that quote. She said,
Yeah.
As a child, I was tomboyish and adventurous. I loved to climb trees, explore the woods, and get my hands dirty. And it's so true. You can see that curiosity, that need to experience things firsthand. It was there from the beginning.
And it wasn't just about, physical adventures. She was curious about everything, always learning, always questioning things. Yeah, and there's this other quote from her that's always stuck with me. She said, "The most effective way to do it is to do it."
Simple, but powerful.
Exactly. It's like her whole philosophy in a nutshell.
Like, stop waiting for permission. Stop letting fear hold you back. If you want to do something, just go do it.
Exactly. And that's Amelia Earhart, isn't it? That belief in action, in taking risks, in pushing the boundaries of what people think is possible.
And it's a message that I think still means so much today, especially for women who are, still fighting to break those barriers, to achieve their dreams in fields that are, well, let's be honest, often dominated by men.
No doubt about it. She knew what it was like to face those societal expectations, and she challenged them head on with everything she did, everything she said.
Like when she wrote about that transatlantic flight, the one where she was a passenger, she said, I wanted to do it myself. It wasn't enough to just be there. She wanted to be the one in control.
That's what makes her such an amazing role model, that fierce independence, that refusal to let others define her.
And it's not just about gender either. Her message, it's universal. It's about courage, with determination, about believing in yourself. It speaks to anyone who's ever felt held back, by their circumstances, by doubt, by that fear of failing.
Absolutely. And let's not forget, she was doing all of this when aviation was still so new. I mean, the risks were huge. The technology, compared to what we have now, it was primitive.
It's wild to imagine, navigating by the stars, relying on those old radios, flying across oceans, knowing that if something went wrong, well, help could be a long way off.
It's hard to even comprehend. But she faced those challenges head on, and she did it with this sense of joy, of adventure, of pure determination.
And I think that's what's so inspiring about her story. It's not just what she did, it's how she did it. The courage, the resilience, that unwavering belief in herself.
It reminds us that we all have that potential, that ability to overcome obstacles, to achieve amazing things if we're just willing to push ourselves, to embrace the unknown.
It's like she's still speaking to us all these years later, saying, don't be afraid to fly, to push your limits, to chase your dreams. The sky's the limit.
And that's a legacy worth remembering. Whether she reached her destination or was lost to the Pacific, Amelia Earhart's spirit continues to soar.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into the life and the mystery of Amelia Earhart, I think the question we're left with is, what are your boundaries? What dreams